Now, a lot of people are unsure what to think of Van Halen because it's kind of unsure what they are. Are they metal? Are they hair metal? Are they hard rock? To me, they show a lot of signs of what was to come in the 80s. Even though the band was formed in the 70s, early 70s, and finally released their album in the late 70s, from the very start, they had all the aspects of hair metal. The singer that appealed to the girls and was very theatrical, the drummer that had sick grooves, the party and drugs lifestyle, the catchy poppy songs mixed with the heavy kick-ass songs, and of course Eddie Van Halen, the guitar player. He alone inspired how metal would turn out in the 80s, whether it was the heavier bands or even the more soft bands like the hair bands. Everyone wanted to be Eddie Van Halen. Because everyone wanted to be Eddie, playing guitar turned into really fast technical shred playing. Now, the Van Halen brothers started out very poor, and they sailed all the way from the Netherlands to America. Their father was a trained musician. He also got Eddie and Alex into music, starting with the piano, but he eventually got them a guitar and a drum set. And just like the Abbott brothers from Pantera, what would become the guitarist of the band originally started out on the drums, and vice versa. But of course, Alex started to get really good at Eddie's drums, so he got pissed off and wanted to be good at something else, and he took up the guitar and became a legend. They kept forming a lot of heavy and fun bands in the 70s, but then they got serious when they formed a band called Genesis with Mark Stone on bass, and they got this weird guy named David Lee Roth to sing, but they only got him to sing because they wanted the cool equipment that he had. And just like how Eddie Van Halen shaped the guitar for the 80s, David Lee Roth would shape cock rock literally with his cock. Now, David Lee Roth was a good singer that was very, very different for the time, that had more of a lower register. But to make the band better, they got rid of Mark Stone and added a good bass player that also did great backing vocals to add to Dave's lower register named Michael Anthony. Of course, because Genesis was already a band, they changed their band name to Mammoth, and then David Lee Roth convinced the Van Halen brothers that, hey, your last name is badass, you should go with that. Now, both band names are pretty good, but I gotta say Van Halen is, of course, the better band name. And this is when Gene Simmons from Kiss had an eye on the band. He funded a really classic demo tape that showed more than the songs that they would put on their first album. Pretty much a lot of songs that they'd put throughout their career. The demo tape showed an onslaught of speed, intensity, and just absolute fun all around. It was faster, more intense than anything at the time. It was very heavy metal. And this is where the band's discography begins. The greatest debut album of all time, Van Halen. Van Halen 1 is a home run. A 10 out of 10 debut. It is absolutely perfect. As far as I'm concerned, this is the absolute start of hair metal. It has everything to it. It's definitely metal and definitely sleazy. Right away from this album, Eddie Van Halen made a name for himself. He was always messing around with cool new sounds he could make through his guitar. And because, like he said, he didn't have really any good distortion pedals or anything, he would spend hours messing around with his guitar to see what sounds he could get. Sounds that none of the people really thought of. Now, even though Steve Hackett from Yes and several other people did tapping before Eddie Van Halen, they didn't do it as much as he did, and he thought of some other cool techniques like squealing and other things. And because it was cool experimentation with guitars, he invented whole new ideas to building them. And nothing shows off Eddie's skills more than the classic instrumental song that opens You Really Got Me, Eruption. There's literally not a single weak moment on this album. Every other song is either really catchy and really cool, or it's really heavy and badass. Running with the Devil starts the album with just such fury. The album has a bunch of classic hit singles on it, but my other favorite songs in the album have to be the two deep cuts later in the album. One of them being the most furious on the album, one of them being one of the more slower, groovy ones. The slower one being the song where David Lee Roth's voice is really on fire, Little Dreamer. And then my favorite heavy song being the one where the whole band is on fire, the atomic punk. One last thing, on this tour for Van Halen 1, the band did one thing that no one else can ever do. Black Sabbath is just such a legendary and incredible band that's one of everyone's favorite bands ever if you're a metalhead, of course. And they fucking blew them off the stage with Ozzy on vocals. One does not simply blow Black Sabbath off the stage. Van Halen 2 came out a year after and is noted by many people as being one of those albums that's a sophomore slump because the band was playing for so long before this. Their debut felt like their third album in, so a lot of people say that this album is just weaker than the first one, which it's not as good as the first one, but it's almost as good. I don't know why everyone thinks this album sucks or is significantly weaker. I think people need to take it more for what it is and for what it is. It's a really, really great album. I think the biggest problem with Van Halen 2 and why people thought that this album was a little bit softer, it was almost like a sellout, it's not as heavy, is because even though there's a lot of heavy moments on this album, they start it slow. You're No Good being a cover song, it's more slow and groovy and it's good, but it feels wrong to start the album that way. And then of course it goes into the poppiest song on the album, Dance the Night Away. A lot of people think, oh shit, this is like a sellout, soft album. But then it gets fucking heavy from that point on. I really think they should have started this album with the incredibly heavy kick-ass song that I saw them start their live set with, Light Up the Sky. And like how Eddie showed off his incredible guitar finesse on Eruption, this time he shows off his acoustic guitar skills on Spanish Fly, doing a lot of weird tapping and sound effects, which is like, well, that's so Eddie Van Halen, but you know what? It's really cool for his style. Once again, there's absolutely no weak song in this album. It's just that the songs on Van Halen 1 were a little bit better. For me, my favorite song on this album is the really, really odd song that has like a weird time signature to it. A song where Alex and Eddie are equally as badass. Out of Love Again. Everyone, of course, likes the two opening songs in The Cradle Will Rock and Everyone Wants Some. And in The Cradle Will Rock actually features a keyboard that's distorted instead of a guitar. To Lost Control, Lost Control, Lost Control, my favorite fast song in the album. But my other favorite song is the soft acoustic song. At this point, Could This Be Magic is my absolute favorite Van Halen song.
I see lonely ships upon the water. Better save the women and children first. Sail away with someone's daughter. Better save the women and children first.
In 1981, they had to return to the studio because Women and Children First was considered, well, good, but not as strong, and they were kind of on the decline after their first album. Slowly on the decline, of course, because they were still really popular, and they still had a good fan base. But the band became very lazy with writing this album, which usually spells out doom for the album, but Eddie Van Halen stepped up to the plate. He wrote just about all this album alone. He would stay up nights just writing heavy riffs, and because he was pissed off that everyone else was being lazy and not giving a shit, especially like David Lee Roth and his brother, they were all fucking around and getting high and drunk, He wrote some of the most heavy songs they've ever done, making this a really interesting album and a fan favorite. However, of all the David Lee Roth albums, this is actually the lowest selling one. A lot of people didn't like it at first because it didn't really have a kind of hit single type of song, but it's one of those albums that's for the fans. It has great deep cuts. And starting off the album with one of Eddie Van Halen's weird guitar techniques where he would tap the shit out of his guitar to give it this weird keyboard sound on Mean Street, my favorite song on the album. Dirty Movies has a great groovy swagger, and Sinner's Swing has a really weird beat to it that's really kick-ass. Even though this album is very underrated, it still birthed a fan favorite live song that's incredibly heavy and badass, Unchained. In the middle of the song features one of my favorite Van Halen moments ever where the producer's like, "Come on, Dave, give me a break." He's like, "One break coming up."
Nothing stays the same, unchained. And you hit the ground running change. Ain't nothing stays the same, unchained. Yeah, you hit the ground running.
And I want to take this time to note that the artwork is really interesting because this artwork comes from some like weird abstract painting, and each part of this artwork actually has to do with the song. If you see towards the top left, you see the guy hitting the ground running, and then you see the couple having sex in the corner, which of course is Dirty Movies. On the right, you see a guy getting jacked, which is Mean Street, and then the, of course, bottom left is One Foot Out the Door. Now to talk about the weird song on the album. They always have the fucking weird song that starts out Sunday Afternoon in the Park, which is a bunch of weird sound effects and drumming. But then it goes into One Foot Out the Door, which is just as weird, but still pretty kick-ass. Probably my least favorite song on the album, though.
Got 1 foot out the door, time to hit the road. Ain't no match for your mean old man, I think it's time to roll.
In '82, Van Halen released Diver Down, which is a really interesting album, especially nowadays, because a lot of people don't like this one anymore because they think it's all covers and just a mess and it should have been released as an EP. But you know what? I find it very interesting and very experimental, and I think overall it's still a really good album, just like all of the early David Lee Roth albums. This is my least favorite of like the David Lee Roth albums, but it still has a lot of really good stuff. Right off the bat, it starts with some really great songs like Where Have All the Good Times Gone and Hang 'Em High, but there's just so many weird moments like Secrets, which is probably my least favorite song on the album. It just feels too weird, too experimental. Of course, the most famous song on the album is the hit song that's also a cover, and I think it's done tastefully, Pretty Woman.
Pretty woman, stop a while. Pretty woman, talk a while. Pretty woman, give your smile to me.
Dancing in the Street's another famous cover on this album. That's one of the big hits. Then they also have Little Guitars, which has a weird Spanish feel to it, which I kind of dislike the more I hear it. The Full Bag's my favorite song on the album, but I also want to take note before we go. Big Bad Bill, and this is another cover that's like the acoustic weird song that they have on the album. And this features Alex and Eddie's dad playing the clarinet throughout the entire song. You know what? I quite like this song.
Well, way down yonder in Louisville lived a cat named Big Bad Bill. I wants to tell you how the cat was rough and tough. He could shut his stuff, had the whole town scared to death.
So for album after album after album, it seems like the band's kind of going into obscurity. They're just not topping the first album or getting really big hits like the first couple albums had. So to correct this error, in 1984, Van Halen released arguably the most important album of the 80s, 1984. This album feels like the band being reborn as well. It has a lot of great energy like the early stuff, but it also has this pop flair to it that actually adds to the album. I used to think it took away from it because it sounded cheesy, especially with like the synthesizers and shit. But you know what? It actually works on a lot of songs. Even though Sammy Hagar would tell you differently, this is the highest selling Van Halen album, the most popular Van Halen album ever. Talk about 4 massive hit singles, 3 with incredible music videos, and a bunch of other really cool deep tracks the fans love. It's weird, you can almost look at this album as like a sellout move because it's like less rockin' and less sleazy. But you know what? It's still as intense with a lot of really fucking heavy kick-ass songs on it. And then, of course, poppy songs that are done tastefully. So, to me, it's not really a sellout move. It's just more of a polished move, if that makes any sense, because it's like there's sound, but matured and polished. And of course, it appeals to more people because this album was such a major hit, especially with the songs like Jump, which features Eddie Van Halen very prominent on the keyboards and synthesizers and not just the guitar. But I mean, right after that, after thinking, well, maybe they're going poppy, they kick into fucking Panama, one of the heaviest, most kick-ass songs that they've ever done. And of course, you get cool kick-ass songs like Top Jimmy, Drop Dead Legs, and then my favorites on the album, the hit single with one of the best music videos ever, and one of the most recognizable intros ever with the double bass drums going fucking insane, Hot for Teacher.
Got it bad, I'm hot for teacher. I got it bad, so bad, I'm hot for teacher.
Then the album ends with some really kick-ass songs, Girls Gone Bad and House of Pain, which are really heavy. But I want to take note of the very, very poppy, ballady song on the album. A song that I used to hate. It used to be my absolute least favorite on the album. I thought it was really cheesy. But you know what? I'll wait. God, does David Lee Roth sing really good. These first 6 albums are absolutely classic and overall really high rating albums for me. But, like all good things, they have to come to an end.
We're having a career difference here. We're having a musical difference. And we're going to go our own ways. And we cried and we hugged and we split. And 2 weeks later, I'm reading in Rolling Stone what an asshole I am. And how poor little Eddie was forced to spend the last 12 years of his life living a lie. It's like a National Enquirer or something. And here comes his wife, to back it up, and on and on and on. So I stayed quiet for 6 months, 7 months. And I'm just reading diatribe after harangue, after this, after that, again and again and again. And I still believe it's not necessary to make a comparison. I don't think you have to make a choice, but Van Halen demands it. Van Halen is demanding, for some bizarre, retarded reason, for the audience to make a choice. You have to either love us and hate him or vice versa. They demand it. Well, I'll rise to the challenge. If we have to have a comparison, then fine. I eat you for breakfast, pal. I eat you and smile.
Hello, baby.
In 1986, Van Halen released 5150 with a different singer. I have no clue why they thought it was a good idea to sack David Lee Roth. I guess they just finally got annoyed with him. But whatever, honestly it was kind of a bad idea, especially with a lot of songs in this album. It feels like they were kind of written for David and it would have been a lot better with him. In fact, I'm only going to say this about this album and not any other Sammy Hagar era album. The riffs and the songwriting on this album are actually pretty decent. It could have been an incredibly good album, but it's still decent. Eddie Van Halen was interested in this up-and-coming rock star known as Sammy Hagar, who had, of course, that hit song, I Can't Drive 55. And now, even though I don't like Sammy Hagar, I have to admit some of his solo songs, especially that one, were pretty good. Now, he originally came from a band named Montrose, but he decided to go solo for some reason, and it was working better for him. Now, Sammy Hagar nowadays says a bunch of really stupid shit, like that the Van Hagar era sold more than the Van Halen with David Lee Roth. And the dumbest thing that he's ever said was solo Sammy Hagar was doing better than Van Halen. Yeah, right, you dumbass. You had one hit song that wasn't even nearly as big as Hot for Teacher, Jump, or fucking Panama. Now, a lot of you Sammy Hagar nuts are probably getting salty because oh, you just favor the fucking David Lee Roth era. Sammy's the better singer. Honestly, I think that not only these albums are run by Sammy, but of course a lot of the Sammy Hagar albums are ruined by the fucking music written. Add to this album, the songwriting just becomes absolute total dog shit. But you know what? It's decent on this album, and there's actually a lot of moments where Sammy Hagar sounds really good. And you know what? His voice is pretty good for what it is. Sometimes he just gives half-assed vocal performance, and I just don't think it works. Now, I did say that 1984 was the bigger album than 5150, even though 5150 was a #1 album, and 1984 was a #2 on the Billboard. But of course, 1984's momentum would bump this up to #1 no matter what. And what album still stands as the more famous, more important one? Of course, 1984. This one has one single that really stays on the radio. But I defy you to go up to random people in the street that like rock music and ask them if they know the song Hot for Teacher, Panama, and Jump. And if they know the song Dreams, they'll be like, what the hell is Dreams? The album just starts weird. The song Good Enough has good riffs, and it feels like it was more suited for David Lee Roth. I just absolutely hate the way the song starts, even though it's good. I hate how it starts with Sammy Hagar going like, hello, baby. Of course, it has the two big hit singles, Why Can't This Be Love and Dreams. And you know what? What's up with these Sammy Hagar albums and every song sucks total ass except the most poppy hit singles like Right Now and Dreams. The song's actually really good, and it was in that really shitty Power Ranger movie. And the other two hit singles, Why Can't This Be Love and Love Walks In, are also pretty decent. The worst song is the last song, Inside. And even though I love Dreams for what it is, for me the best song on the album is the defining song of the Sammy Hagar era, and easily the best song that they ever did as that lineup. A song that was originally called The Best of Both Wholes, The Best of Both Worlds.
One big pile of shit.
Jeff Goldblum speaks for himself, ladies and gentlemen. This is the point when the band becomes total shit. We're going to be seeing a lot of him from this point on. In 1988, Van Halen released the incredibly thin, dull-sounding album OU812. And that name means exactly what it says. OU812, huh? We're so clever with our stupid titles. This shows the Van Hagar lineup in full effect, being as shitty as humanly possible. The only good songs in this album are the first two, Mine All Mine and When It's Love, my favorite being Mine All Mine, which is actually really freaking good. But for me, there's a lot of dog shit, and I don't know why everyone praises that song, Cabo Wabo, as being like such a great song that's so progressive. It's not progressive just because it's long, it's literally a verse and chorus, the entire song, and then a guitar solo. It's not progressive.
There's a sleepy town south of the border. You go there once.
That is one big pile of shit.
So Van Halen follow up shit with more shit that's just not quite as shitty, a little bit more heavy. 1991's For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. Haha, they're so clever against their titles because the first letters of each word says fuck. Pound Cake is terrible. Spanked is terrible. Runaround is terrible. Pleasure Dome is decent, actually. And this is another one of their prog epics. It's not prog, and it's not that epic, but it's actually decent. Judgment Day is quite heavy, and that one's alright as well. In and Out's okay, and you know what? I quite like the pop hit single Right Now. That's probably my favorite song on the album. Overall, it's better than OU812, but not by much.
pile of shit.
1995's Balance made me think maybe they finally hit their start with the Van Hagar era. Maybe they're finally going to make a pretty good focused album that's more heavy and more gritty and raw like the good old early Van Halen. And it even starts really well. Two great songs, The Seventh Seal and Can't Stop Loving You. From that point on, Sammy Hagar's dumb voice and Eddie Van Halen's dumb songwriting just comes into full effect with complete dog shit. This album's the worst of the Van Hagar albums, and it's easily their worst album. Do not get it. The first two songs are worth checking out, though, for sure.
That is one big pile of shit.
In the late 90s, Eddie and Alex finally got the courage and brains to fire that idiot Sammy Hagar, which raised a lot of questions. Will the band reunite with David Lee Roth? Nothing really happened until years later. They finally, probably because of money reasons, decided to reunite with David Lee Roth. Now, I believe this was after Eddie Van Halen had actually had tongue cancer from smoking, so he stopped drugs and alcohol for good at this point and made a full recovery, and now looks like a cool grandpa. But something interesting happened. Eddie Van Halen's long-lost son Wolfgang Van Halen came through the woodworks as a talented musician, and to keep up the family feel of the band, and of course the title of the band, Van Halen, they got rid of Michael Anthony and had Wolfgang take his place. Now, what do I think of this? I think nothing really of it. I actually quite like Wolfgang and Michael just as much. In fact, their backing vocals are equally good for different reasons, and their bass playing is both really good. I'd argue that Wolfgang's probably more talented, and it's cool to have another like Van Halen in the band. But of course, Michael Anthony was just so fun, and he's a classic member, so it's like, you know, for me, it's good and bad for a change. But I have to say that it was really terrible when they first announced that they were reuniting without Michael Anthony. They started putting up band pictures removing Michael Anthony from it, and the fans freaked out and they changed all that shit. So they started touring again as classic Van Halen with Wolfgang Van Halen instead, which raised questions: will they release an album? And do these grandpas even have the energy to release another album? Well, Wolfgang pretty much inspired a different kind of truth because he was showing his dad some of the unused demos and trying to inspire him to use the energy of the old days to write some kick-ass songs again, which he did. He actually reused a lot of the demos from that Gene Simmons demo tape and wrote some other really kick-ass heavy songs. And you know what? A different kind of truth might have one of the absolute loudest and worst productions ever, and David Lee Roth croaking pretty badly at some points in the album. But you know what? The songs on this album are really good, which is really surprising. I used to not really like the song Tattoo, the opening song, as much, but you know what? I quite like it. It's really different and really cool. And of course, they have that badass song that was from the demo tapes, She's the Woman, which isn't as good as the original because David Lee Roth's voice isn't as good, but it still rules. I gotta say, I laughed my ass off from the point in the song when his voice really sounds bad, where he's like, "Some Casablanca ding joint!" Now, there are a couple weaker points in the album, especially songs that David Lee Roth kind of fucks up with his voice, like Bullet Head. But for me, the absolute most boring, uninspired song on the album that doesn't even have good riffs or melodies to it, which every song, no matter what on this album, still has, Beats Working is just completely dull. It feels like a Van Hagar song. But for me, the best song on this whole album is the fastest, heaviest song they've released in years. One of their best songs ever. A song that even David Lee Roth's bad voice at this point couldn't fuck up, Chinatown.
Everybody in Cowboys Bar, warring flares and lowering cars. A buck is still a buck.
So after they finally reunited with Different Kind of Truth, there's still a lot of tensions, especially with the shitty Sammy Hagar camp that still keeps talking shit and talking out of his ass. The Eddie Van Halen camp that keeps talking shit, and then David Lee Roth, who's just kind of whacked out of his mind. I think Van Halen will come to a complete end sometime soon, because Eddie and David just do not get along. But you know what? It was a great run. Even though the Sammy Hagar albums were pretty much awful for the most part, they released some of the most incredible hair metal of the time.